According to Gorsuch, it is clearly the Congress and the states that possess the power to impose broad public health mandates like vaccination. Neither Biden nor OSHA can simply declare it. Legislatures have to act. Democrats want a vaccine mandate, then Democratic legislators have to propose legislation that includes one. They can't just pretend that the power to impose it already exists under previous laws that were clearly never intended to be read that way. As my colleague at Reason magazine, Jacob Sullum, explained in his article about the decision, liberals disagreed. They did not see COVID-19 as especially different from other workplace hazards. COVID is, to quote the dissent, an infectious disease that has already killed hundreds of thousands and sickened millions, that is most easily transmitted in the shared indoor spaces that are the hallmark of American working life. It is perverse, given these circumstances, to read the Act's grant of emergency powers in the way the majority does, as constraining OSHA from addressing one of the gravest workplace hazards in the agency's history. But of course, OSHA can address COVID-19 in the workplace. It just needs new and explicit orders from Congress to do so. If Democrats want to force these kinds of measures on people, they need to run for Congress on an explicit platform of forcible vaccination. They need to win office, and then they need to pass legislation. That's how the system is supposed to work. Now, of course, in practice, they can't do that because there isn't enough popular support for a nationwide vaccine mandate. According to Economist YouGov polling, Biden's vaccine mandate barely cleared 50% overall. And that was back in the fall when it was more apparent that perhaps widespread vaccination could hold back cases. Today, as Americans contend with the Omicron wave, which has seen thousands and thousands of vaccinated people catch COVID-19 anyway, there's much less justification for forcing someone to get vaccinated in order to protect other people in their workplace. Those people can obviously contract COVID anyway. The vaccine is about protecting the health of the person who gets the vaccine. By reducing the odds, that person will visit the hospital or die. You protect yourself from COVID by getting vaccinated, not by forcing this choice on someone else. The Biden administration is clearly frustrated that they have had no better luck controlling COVID cases than the Trump administration. It is now increasingly resorting to desperate plans. Feeling sick, possibly with COVID? Well, now you can order a test from the federal government, and the Postal Service will ship it to you in just 7 to 12 days. As even the New York Times concedes, that is likely to be after the Omicron peak has already passed, obviously likely to be after someone is possibly recovered from the symptoms that caused them to seek the test in the first place. So the government should realize that it can't test its way out of the pandemic. It can't mandate its way out of the pandemic. It can't mask or lock down or socially distance its way out of the pandemic. Government leaders can and should encourage vaccination and booster shots as an individual health measure. Your vaccine protects you from severe hospitalization and death. If you're vaccinated, your eventual experience with COVID, because, spoiler, you can and will get it at some point, will be mild. Overwhelmingly likely to be mild. It truly will be just the flu. That's kind of the best we can do, and we need to admit it.
The current attorney general, when she got in there, for whatever reason, maybe politics, wiped clean Schuette's team, wiped clean the Republican attorney general's team, brought in her new team. I can't give you the exact reason, call it incompetence or other motives, but they did not follow through on this, following the money, financial fraud. And also, they only charged the governor with a misdemeanor when Charlie and I both have reporting that the previous investigation was gunning for involuntary manslaughter. So I don't want to make it a Democrat-Republican thing, but just It's a tale of two investigations, really. I don't know. The Attorney General has not answered our specific questions, why she dropped financial fraud charges, why they did not follow through on this RICO investigation, and why the governor was only charged with a misdemeanor.
And Charlie, what more can still be done? And how much is still under the statute of limitations, and how much of it has escaped into impunity at this point?
It's a great question, man. I mean, it really is. And I just wish we were on the phone just talking at midnight with each other. I don't know. I don't know. Like, statute of limitations for many crimes is 6 years, right? But you could look at this thing as it was ongoing. They switched over to the water in 2014, right? But the cover-up was going in 2016. You know, the financial fraud is currently ongoing. Long story short, I don't think the Attorney General's got the gravitas. She doesn't understand this stuff, so she doesn't bring it. Could it be brought? Yes, I think so. Is it going to be brought? No. In fact, breaking news for your listeners, just the charges currently on file, which mirror the charges that the last investigators brought. Snyder's going to walk, and probably everybody involved in this is going to walk, because the current Attorney General screwed it up so badly. that, they were like subpoenaing all the emails, right? But there's no taint team, and a taint team is a third party to go through all the emails to make sure nothing's privileged. Attorney-client discussion.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't do it, and we're caught up in that. This thing's not even going to go to trial, if it goes to trial, for at least a year. It's a mess. This was the biggest story for a year. The whole
Absolutely.
world was
Yeah, I remember. There was a wall-to-wall coverage of this. There was a lot of coverage on MSNBC, other places, deservedly. And we haven't. Are you the only guys covering this that speak to a national audience at this point?
Well, thank you for having us. Your parents still live here, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, we care about your parents.
Yeah.
One for all and all for one, man. That's what this is about. It's
Yeah.
not political. It's not political. We want some justice. They entered into a settlement. The Attorney General likes to say it's historic. But when you divide the money up, every kid that got poisoned is going to get enough for a used truck, and every adult that got poisoned is going to get enough for a used Yugo. That's great. But what about the creeps, the lawyers, the bankers, the politicians, the contractors who are eating steak and drinking Bordeaux today? What about them?
Right now, everywhere we look, people have COVID. Vaccinated or not, everyone seems to be catching the virus with a whopping 800,000 new cases per day. Because Omicron is spreading like wildfire throughout the country, indiscriminately infecting anyone it comes into contact with, some serious failings by our public health officials, the CDC, Fauci, our politicians, and the mainstream media are becoming glaringly obvious, to the point where I think their failings rise to the level of crimes against humanity. The scientists and health experts, the people responsible for guiding us safely and scientifically through this pandemic, have been hyper-focused on vaccines. They raced towards a vax, told us to hunker down and wait for the vax. When it became available, they told us to get the vax. Then all the discussion centered around the awful people who refused the vax. So then they mandated the vax. And throughout this entire time, which is now at 2 years in, they've never focused on, and often, which is why it rises to the level of a crime, even shut down discussion surrounding the well-known scientific principle of natural immunity. They shut down and even demonized any discussion of potential early treatments, and they failed to give us good instructions on what to do when our loved ones or we ourselves catch COVID. They flat out refused to focus on any of this. They instead swore if we all got the vaccine, the pandemic would end. Well, it didn't end. Everyone is catching COVID. People who got double vaxxed and triple vaxxed and wore double masks and kept their kids out of school and gave up Christmas with family, and even worse, gave up being with their loved ones by their side as they breathed their last breaths because they weren't allowed to be next to them, are catching COVID. Everyone is catching COVID. And as people are catching it, they're starting to realize they have no tools left in their toolkit. Somebody tell me, what are you supposed to do when you catch COVID? Seriously, can you answer that question? Besides quarantining yourself and wishing you were vaccinated more than you already are, what are you supposed to do? Do you isolate yourself away from your family and fight the virus alone while hoping and praying you don't need to go to the hospital? Because that's what they've left us with. Why don't we know more about natural immunity and how long it lasts? With so many people getting sick, wouldn't it be helpful to know whether or not people who have already recovered can take on the task of caring for their loved ones who are now ill? The Israelis came out with an enormous study showing natural immunity afforded 13 times more protection against reinfection than vaccination. But quickly, the CDC released its own highly flawed study, claiming the opposite, that previously infected people were more likely to catch the virus than those vaccinated. Now, wouldn't it be nice to know which study is right? Wouldn't it be nice to know how long natural immunity lasts? Wouldn't it be nice to know if you do get reinfected, whether or not the disease is more or less severe? Signs point towards previous infection being protective to some degree, in the least lessening symptoms when reinfected. And what about the natural immunity younger people seem to have? We've known throughout the pandemic that young people often have very mild illness when infected. But again, the mere mention that they maybe should be less afraid of catching the virus was met with fierce resistance. So here we are now. We have people sick, and yet young and old and previously infected alike are all equally scared. And now people who are sick in bed with COVID who can't get themselves water or Tylenol or food to eat are reliant on the brave in their families to care for them if they're lucky enough to have someone brave at all. COVID can often be so debilitating, people can't get themselves out of bed for even the most basic of needs. Frightened people who otherwise maybe wouldn't need to be frightened because they're younger or previously infected are hiding away and leaving food on doorsteps for loved ones, expecting expecting them to crawl out of bed and care for themselves. And often people don't get the care they need until they've gotten so bad they need hospitalization. Why don't we have more info on who is perhaps safest to care for others in the family? If you can't get water to stay hydrated, Tylenol to get your temperature down, someone to run a humidifier or to get you food, how can you successfully fight off a virus? I suspect many people didn't get the early care they needed because people were too frightened to be around them, and they wound up in the hospital or even worse. And speaking of early treatment, again, no honest discussion or research has been earnestly put into trying to determine what could give a person a better fighting chance. Many early treatments that maybe weren't 100% effective, but reduced severe outcomes by 30% or 40% or 50%, which is better than nothing, were demonized as conspiracy theories before anyone put any real effort into studying them. I can guarantee you right now that anyone sick in bed with COVID will take a treatment that gives them even a 10% better chance of reducing symptoms than nothing at all. But that's pretty much what we've been left with. Nothing at all. Even monoclonal antibodies, a treatment that seemed to work, has been suppressed in the vaccine or bust movement. Yet here we are. People are fully vaccinated, even boosted, sick in bed, scared. And the best weapon our public health officials have given them against COVID is what? NyQuil?